Well, hello, virtual audience. My name is Amadou Dramé, and I work at the Metropolitan Planning Council as a Housing and Community Development Manager. For the last 2 years, I served as the Director of Policy Advocacy and Legislative Affairs at Safer Foundation, so this panel discussion is very important to me. Today, I have the privilege of serving as the panel moderator. The title of this panel is Scaling Impact, Policy Recommendations for Systemic Transformation of Reentry in Illinois. We have a very dynamic list of panelists today, and for time's sake, we will not do your standard introductions, and we'll try to jump as quickly into the questions as possible. However, I do want to acknowledge and thank our panelists for being here today. We are joined by Deanne Benos, co-founder and co-director of the Women's Justice Institute, Alderman Walter Burnett of Chicago's 27th Ward and member of the Chicago City Council, Yaacov Delaney, the statewide reentry coordinator in the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative and the Office of the Lieutenant Governor of Illinois, Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson, member of the Cook County Board, and Jennifer Parrack, Reentry Administrator with the Illinois Department of Corrections. And so this first question, if we can jump straight in, is directed at Alderman Burnett and Commissioner Johnson. We heard earlier today in our panel, in one of the previous panels, that just how large of an impact mass incarceration and reentry are having on our communities throughout Illinois, but especially so in the Chicago area and Cook County. According to the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority, between the years of 1979 and 2019, over 1.7 million Chicagoans were arrested or convicted of a crime. That's about 1.7 million Chicagoans, give or take, between that period with an arrest or conviction record. Yet usually when statistics like this are cited, people usually respond with surprise. I can't tell you how many times I've mentioned that to people, that 42% of working age adults in the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago have an arrest or conviction record. The surprise that people have is surprising to me, because I kind of live and work in this world, but I think it speaks to some shortness and some gaps in terms of public awareness about the scope of reentry challenges in this particular issues that some communities face, regardless about how people feel about mass incarceration. So my question is, what can the people participating in this conference virtually, who are advocates, directly impacted people, practitioners, philanthropic partners, and other government officials like yourselves, what can they do to increase public awareness about the impact that reentry is having on socioeconomic problems in our state and region? And I guess the second part to this question I will pose is, what can we do to get your colleagues on the Chicago City Council and the Cook County Board of Commissioners to care more about these issues and really start investing and scaling up, bringing these services up to scale in the ways that they need to be?
Yeah, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you all for having me on this panel. As you know, I'm an ex-offender myself. I served time. God blessed me to turn it around. And one of the main ways that I was able to turn it around was by getting the education that gave me the confidence to be able to, pursue a career and engage with people. So, I think education is very important. I think that we need to work on trying to put a new face on people who have been incarcerated, right? Like, I'm a face of a person who have been incarcerated. I'm successful. I've been alderman for 26 years now, right? I've been out for over 35 years, and I've been doing well. There's a lot of people who are successful, who have been incarcerated, and who are doing well. The challenge is not only do society see ex-offenders in a negative light, but ex-offenders see ex-offenders in a negative light, right? I mean, for me, because my life is a glass bowl, right? I have to share everything with everyone, because everyone have to be able to see it. There's a lot of people who have been successful as ex-offenders who, they keep it on the down low, right? owners of companies, millionaires, people that work in law offices, folks all over society that's in our society that's doing well are ex-offenders, but no one ever know about it because they don't tell it, right? And I think we need to change the image of what an ex-offender is.
It's overwhelming. It's taxing literally on our communities. And the challenge that we have is that there's this gap of understanding and knowledge while at the same time trying to transform a system that has penalized Blackness in particular. That same cohort, if you look at individuals born in that time period, and I'm included there, mid to late 70s, early 80s, 7 in 10 of boys born during that time period, if they did not finish high school, ended up in the penal system. And 30% of that same cohort as a whole have been criminalized. That's a wicked system, right? And I think people understanding the gravity of how this system intentionally targeted an entire generation of individuals is the first step. I think the second thing is we have to look at the economic impact. And there's an education effort here to do that, where we literally have $1 million blocks in terms of investment in incarceration. So the neighborhood in which I'm raising my family and my wife and I on the west side in Austin, in the Austin neighborhood, where you literally have blocks of individuals who've been incarcerated, and their investment for their incarceration has literally cost millions of dollars. I think the third thing, in terms of the last part of your question, so there's organizing, there's information, and then you have to actually introduce legislation. In order to make this situation, to repair this situation, you have to undo the harm, and you also have to set us up for success. And that's everything from making housing available to individuals who are formerly incarcerated, workforce development and training for individuals who have been formerly incarcerated, and then, of course, educating. These are forms of reparations that I believe that as a legislative body like the Cook County Board of Commissioners, we've attempted to do that by eliminating the racist gang database, the Just Housing Amendment that provide opportunities for folks who are formerly incarcerated. This impacts women, of course, particularly women who have mothers. So it's an education, of course, the information, it's the organizing, and it's the introducing of legislation. These are the things that we have to do with expediency in order to right these failures.
The next question is directed, and again, panelists, if there are questions that aren't necessarily directed at you that you want to chime in on, feel free. But the next question is for Yaacov, Jennifer, and Deanne. As you well know, because we've all been on the phone with one another for quite some time since this pandemic began, the level of communication and collaboration between state government and community-based providers has been very high during this pandemic. And there have been some lessons that we've learned, some new lessons, and a lot of the things that we already knew were confirmed, like the need to figure out a way to automate things like Medicaid enrollment, figuring out effective ways to get people medication prior to release, and helping them acquire a state-issued identification prior to leaving IDOC, or as quickly as possible shortly thereafter in an efficient way. And so there have been some attempts and some ways that we figured out how to do this during the pandemic. But historically, there have been some challenges at the state specifically in trying to figure out how we can automate some of these processes to make things much easier for folks who are being released. And so I guess my question is really two questions, and sorry to set you all up like this, but what prevents state government from fully implementing some existing laws and forging new interagency partnerships that would streamline the reentry process, and what can we do about it? And so I'll go first to Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just our lack of technology, especially within the Illinois Department of Corrections, we are by far probably the farthest agency behind. We're just truly not equipped within our facilities. Some of them are very, very old. to be able to automate things, have internet. We have the security side of things we struggle with as well. We really are trying to take a good look and move forward. I mean, years and years behind what they're doing within the community-based organizations, and what other state agencies are doing. There really is, in the last year, I feel like, a lot better collaboration between state agencies, which also helps. I mean, just the fact that we are behind in technology, but also the lack of communication that has traditionally happened between state agencies. So those are really the two big things, is just updating and continuing to have those conversations. We also have a lot of the issues with staffing. That has been some of the struggle we've had with our Medicaid enrollment.
Okay, and I guess, Jennifer, I would ask, are these things that more investment in technology would help, or would you surmise that there are other factors that contribute to that?
Well, I think there's two things. Absolutely, the investment in technology. We've worked hard to implement reentry resource rooms where individuals can actually enroll themselves in Medicaid. We have approved internet sites. However, just the order of computers and the actual governance process that took well over a year and a half through Do It is part of the struggle that we face. We've done the hard lift. Now it's just getting it rolled out within our facilities. So definitely investment. But we also have to remember, we have a lot of men and women that have served a long period of time in Department of Corrections. We got to back up and start with the very basics. The world has changed around people, especially with technology, and we have not necessarily done a good job of educating people and making sure they're up to speed on how to use the technology, even when they will get access within DOC, but once they're released as well.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Deanne, same question. What can we do to help address these issues around, the implementation of laws and forging those partnerships across, agencies and departments?
I think, well, first I'd say we should just replicate about 1,000 times over the folks on this panel. We could start there. And great administrators like Jen, who are really leading the charge at the department, and Yaacov at the JEO, fighting a really, important battle of rolling the rock up the hill. But as a former correctional administrator, I'm going to take us back even a step further and say that, I formally worked with the department. I've implemented programs that were just sustainable and some that fell apart the minute I left, right? And that's the story of that system. And as now, with founding the WJI and our effort to build this blueprint to cut 50 for women, cut the women's prison population by 50%, all the answers and the big, simple answer that everyone is seeking takes us back much further. And that's the foundation that the system was built and what it was designed to do. So if you were going to build a house, right, and the house had a faulty foundation that was going to crack, you could hire as many designers or interior decorators or paint the rooms pretty or televisions, and the house would always be unsafe for the people within it, right? And it's the same with the system. If you build a prison system on a faulty foundation that was designed for the wrong reasons in the first place, you can have brilliant people like Jen and Yaacov working the system to fix it. But if we don't really take a step back and do, which I'm really glad, because we feel some movement now, right? You always get hopeful and then there's a little disappointment all the time. But this whole, and I don't want to be cliche, but this whole idea of reimagining systems is so critical because it's really about that. And things can be implemented that are brilliant with the right leadership and the right tenacity of someone that's, crazy enough to work there and keep pushing and pushing against the winds. But as long as we don't change culture and change how society looks at those systems, there's always going to be political risk, which will always mean that the next leader could change the philosophy or roll back all of Jen's wonderful work or another leader. So I like that the commissioner talked about laws and things that last, but even you pointed out, Amadou, that laws sometimes aren't even, implemented properly. And so I really think that the answer is culture and a system approach. And I also want to say that the last thing I'll say, because I know I'm talking a lot, is that as we did our work, we designed this map for women and how the earliest beginning of their prison trajectory all the way through, right? And every tool out there talks about prison and community. And it doesn't see prison as part of our community. So when we talk about the politics of why these systems don't change, or why Jen had to wait decades later to get the darn technology, is because we as a community don't see what's happening in prisons as part of our community. There's like an otherness people experience. So there's less investment, there's less humanization, and it affects staff too. Like, it affects the people incarcerated the greatest harm is there, but even it makes it a really difficult place to work and to do your job for even the best intentioned person. So I think that when I answer that, I say that it's culture and a view that prisons are not part of our community. And that's what I would say to that.
Yeah. Well, Deanne, I want to go.
If I can add to that just really quick, it's an important point, that we don't want to be honest as a society of why the prison system, or just policing in general, which is connected to the prison system, was even designed. That's why, I'm not necessarily someone that will use language like reform. How do you reform a system that finds its roots in the extension and the expansion of slavery, right? And when you think about Cook County government and the number of Black men in particular who were brutalized and terrorized by law enforcement and protected by the state's attorney, and then that system profits off of the misery it's created. And that's why I believe reimagining what public safety looks like, but calling out the racist failed system of incarceration and policing and how much money we spend in that system is really very much a part of this work. So I'm glad that our sister has elevated that part of the conversation, because that has to be front and center as we think about how we shift the dynamics in our country, particularly Chicago and Cook County, the state of Illinois, and how we reimagine public safety by acknowledging the fact that it's a failed racist system that was designed to extend and protect property, and not for this sort of protection of our so-called civility. It was designed to protect the interest of those who benefit from captives.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Commissioner. Deanne, I want to go back to a theme that you spoke to in your last comment, and that was really the role that people who are directly impacted by the system play in the design of policies, programs, and bringing these things to scale. And Jennifer and Yaacov, I'd like both of you to also chime in on this as well, because I know through working with you and your stories that this is either part of what you do, like through your life experiences, or part of what you do through your work. And I know that Jennifer, in our case, we've collaborated around some of this very closely. But if you could just speak, Deanne, to the role that people directly impacted by the justice system should play in bringing government investment to scale and creating a more integrated reentry system.
So I'll say at the Women's Justice Institute, my organization, we were founded to build an entire technical assistance project where directly impacted women are leading change and redesigning systems. And so with our task force that's going to come out with a report any day soon, a few delays with everything, the entire task force that has been come together the last few years to design a plan to cut the women's prison population by 50%, leadership for every working group statewide all includes women that have been directly impacted by the system. And I'll say again, as someone who worked with the system, as long as we don't directly engage people who are experiencing it and work with them as architects of change, we will always dehumanize any policy that we create. It's so easy to be far away from a facility at a desk and writing a policy about data and numbers. But until you work directly with somebody who has been directly impacted by that system, you're not going to make the change that you desire. You just won't. I have made that mistake, 15 years ago. When I worked with the system, I did it. I engaged people as much as I could, but not enough, right? But I'll tell you what shaped my entire trajectory in the formation of this institute was conversations with women in prison. And I think that is what will change hearts, minds, and the culture that we're talking about that we need to propel a reimagining of the system. I think that if we don't, we're going to fail. We're going to continue to fail. If we continue to marginalize communities and individuals in their experiences and present them with solutions and throw services at them without focusing on their experience with those services, we will fail miserably. And so that's where we stand on that issue. And so, we have an incredibly brilliant group of formerly incarcerated women that advise us and will be leading our recommendations coming soon. And there's just so much brilliance to it that needs to be heard and seen and acted upon.
From my brief experience of working within the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative, and on this level, what I see is antiquated ways and practices that resist against common sense reentry approaches. For instance, like we know that about 26,000 people are released from IDOC annually. And as you mentioned, like we've been working on the state IDs. We know state IDs are required for people to get job, housing, access to social services and benefits. We know that possessing a state ID is essential for a person that's being released for their reentry process. But a common sense approach is to ensure that each person is being released either has a state ID upon discharge, or they will have the necessary required documents to obtain the state ID. And so what we've been doing since I've been in this role, we've recently been working in collaboration with the Office of First Lady M.K. Pritzker and Secretary of State and the Illinois Department of Corrections around a pilot program that will now activate a Secretary of State mobile unit once a month to Lincoln and Logan correctional facilities to issue state IDs to people being released. So I think the right conversations are being had with the people who are in key positions to make the necessary changes to, as I said, is antiquated ways and practices that people are used to carrying out. But I've noticed since being in this role, the changes are happening. It may be a slow change, but it's happening.
Jennifer, same question.
Yeah, absolutely. Deanne hit it just perfect. Is we throw services at people and we don't really have, DOC is as guilty as anyone, is we have this kind of one approach. You do this group, this group, this group, and then maybe you get to move to this span, how much time you have, or you go on this wait list without really any assessment or talking to individuals about what are their true needs. Does their life look like when they go back home? Is it family, kids, if those kids been impacted, in DCFS, or are they with a grandparent or a significant other? We really need to have those conversations with people as they get prepared to go home, and they need to be starting much earlier than they do now about what is it they really need? What is the support system that they have? And I will tell you, I was honestly had no idea the stories and kind of listening to the guys when I took the job at Kiwani. I thought I had figured out what we needed to do programming wise and what we needed to do around reentry. And the more I listened, the more I learned about different pathways that bring people into Illinois Department of Corrections and what they really need as they prepare to go home and be successful. I learned a lot just by listening, and you talk a little bit about, I moved into this position in January, and I do spend a lot more time in an office behind a computer and writing policy. And so for me, I need to go back to Kewanee on a regular basis or out in our facilities across Department of Corrections and listen. Again, you start dehumanizing people. It really does happen. You think, well, this is the practice, this is how we're going to do it, without really realizing what that really looks like and how that impacts people. There's one thing I will say around having that lived experience and voice at the table. I do feel like our longer term people that have been incarcerated long periods of time are our loudest voices around criminal justice. And I love that, especially around the lack of technology. I really think it's vital, and we really need to have our young men and women at the table. Their reentry needs are much different than, especially around gang violence, education, employment. And that's not the group I feel like even we're doing a good job of trying to bring to the table. And that's a voice I think that needs to be at the table.
Thank you. Deanne, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, someone like Jen, there's increasing numbers of people like her, in positions like this, right? Which is great. And I want to be clear that, and it's not Jen's fault, for example, that she has to be at a desk. It's the system, the way it's designed. And even policies embedded for decades in that system have actually undermined dehumanized people by saying, oh, staff can't interact, or you can't have a conversation with someone, or people in programs in prison can't interact with their mentor when they're outside. And there's some reasons behind that some of which are true narratives and some are false narratives that have perpetuated for why. But just the way it's designed in the policies by which staff have to govern their activities are just so deeply embedded that they actually have performed a disincentive to it, or a disincentive to allowing directly impacted women to go back and to mentor and to lead programs and systems. There are barriers in place to that. It's getting better, but we can talk about it, as much. I think this group believes in it. And then even the best of intentions can be repeatedly blocked by policies that, someone like Jen or Yaacov is going to have to keep ripping down with each effort to make change. So there are barriers that are invisible there.
Definitely. Commissioner Johnson and Alderman Burnett, I want to pivot a bit and talk a bit more about investing in communities and services at the local level, county government, and at the city of Chicago. Commissioner Johnson, I know that really since you've taken office, like a strike of lightning, you've kind of been hitting on a couple of key issues that impact people who have records, reentry housing, but also recently a resolution that was introduced by yourself and adopted by the Cook County Board of Commissioners. But it's said that each recidivism event costs taxpayers and society over $152,000. So whenever somebody who's had a record, released from incarceration, goes back, all of the costs associated with that return total more than $152,000. It includes government expenses associated with justice system involvement, like arrests, courts, incarceration, but also the loss of economic productivity to the state and to our communities for each individual that does recidivate. And according to the Illinois Sentencing Policy Advisory Council, every dollar invested in community-based employment services yields a $20 return. So for every dollar we invest in reentry programming, we get, as a society, $20 worth of return, as opposed to spending $152,000 for every time somebody goes back. So I guess my question to you and Alderman Burnett is, given what we know about the fiscal, social, and economic benefits of investing in these services and bringing them to scale, why haven't our city and county governments made the much needed investments to do that?
Well, I think that we have made some investments. It's just not enough. The city, the county, and the state have been doing some things to help fund organizations like Safer and other organizations to be able to help people get back on their feet. It's just not enough. We need to do more. I would venture to say, if you take a mother who have been incarcerated and you help her get on her feet, you help that whole family. But if she comes home and she can't get on her feet and she has to struggle and go out and hustle and everything, it has an adverse effect on that family. And potentially you're creating more folks to not only her going back to prison, but you also potentially would have her children getting in trouble and getting in the system, whether it's DCFS or whatever the case may be. So it benefits society in a tremendous way when they help us. I remember talking with Deanne Benos. It's good you have her on the panel. I love Deanna when she used to work for the Department of Corrections. Deanna actually she told me a story about going to Thailand and how Thailand invests so much money. The whole community put their arms around folks who have been in trouble in their society and help them to build themselves up. And it has really decreased the recidivism rate in their society, but also it made so many people happy and proud that their family members are doing well. And when we invest in ex-offenders and in services to help ex-offenders get back on their feet and not get recidivized, you invest in the whole family. You don't just invest in that one person. And we need to recognize that in society.
Yeah, there is a great deal of profiting that takes place as a result of the dehumanization of Black and brown people. When you have had a system over decades, generations, hundreds of years now, that has come accustomed with not just our marginalization, but our death of Black and brown people. When you have a system that have come accustomed to that and has benefited from that, there becomes no urgency to change that system. And so that's why, as you alluded to earlier, I moved on this resolution. It's called the Justice for Black Lives Resolution. Everyone got a front row seat to the murder of George Floyd. But here in Chicago and Cook County, we have had a front row seat to that type of brutality for a very long time. But what this resolution did, it acknowledged the fact that we have a failed system of incarceration and policing, but we also spend too much money there. We do. These budgets are moral documents. You can tell a whole lot about someone based upon where they invest their dollars and resources. And that is even scripturally, right? Your heart will be attached to your treasure and vice versa. And so this resolution laid out a very clear pathway of how we need to redirect money away from this failed system of incarceration and jails and policing and invest it into the communities, into the lives in the front end of our existence. Because that's where our priorities have to be. I know we're working hard to make reentry for many of our families who have been devastated by this wicked system, to make reentry a little bit more palatable. But if we're really serious about reimagining the way our systems are structured, you got to put money in housing, mental health, jobs, education, transportation, give people an opportunity to start and run their own businesses. Let's put money in the areas that will help build people's lives versus break their lives. And so the president of Cook County Board has presented her budget to us for us to review on the board, and she took our resolution seriously. I believe that there's more to fight for, but there was a real recognition of moving money away from this incarceral, like penal system into the Justice Advisory Council to help with programs that you're talking about for individuals who we don't want to recidivate, right? It's making sure that we're investing in those areas.
Just for the sake of time, I want to ask you a quick follow-up, and then I want to go to Deanne, Jennifer, and Yaacov, and then we'll do a quick round robin where you all can determine what final message you want to share with our viewers. But at the county level, Commissioner, there's a level of seriousness that you alluded to that the resolution was taken, and that the budget that was introduced was taken. And I'm curious as to what do you attribute that success to in your work with advocates and the county board president? What was the DNA that helped push that through and actually make it happen? And how can we replicate that in places?
It's definitely the organizing. I believe, all of our panelists have said this. We have to hear from people who are impacted. And though I live in a community, though of course I have family members who have been, harmed by this wicked system, there's something unique and powerful when the individuals who have been directly impacted are leading the charge. I appreciate the trust that organizers and organizations have in our leadership on the county. But the truth of the matter is, the best thing that we can do, nothing concedes without a real serious demand. And there is no progress without a real resistance. And we know that. And so I believe the work has to be committed to listening to those voices, as our panelists have already indicated, making sure that they are in leadership roles, and then simply responding to the reality. So when Black people say they cannot breathe, when we say we cannot breathe, you got to actually believe us. And that's what folks who have been penalized by this wicked system have been saying for a very long time. We can't breathe. And so we have to move policies that actually allow people to get their breath, catch their breath.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yaacov, Deanne, and Jennifer, I want to ask you all one question before we do a closing round here. What role should state, county, and local health and human service departments play in addressing the needs of people leaving IDOC and leaving prison and returning back home to communities? I will start with you, Jennifer, and then Deanne, and then we'll go to Yaacov.
Sure. So absolutely just the collaboration. I will say if there's any little silver lining about COVID is we addressed some policy things around release and rapid release of people. But I will say the one that really stands out, and Amadou, you and I have spoke about this quite a bit, is when you have someone leaving out and they can't get a state ID. Number one, they weren't able to get their birth certificate or social security card, or we didn't assist them in doing that. So they don't have those documents, and those offices were closed. And then they can't get a state ID. So then they can't receive their medication or refill of their medication. So you don't have good linkages already for our men and women leaving DOC for medical, for mental health. And the commissioner hit on this. We have to be investing in medical and mental health for our men and women leaving as well. That is really a struggle for a lot of men and women. And when you're not stable, housing falls in there too. You don't have a place to lay your head at night. You don't have the ability to get your medication to be stable or address your medical issues. Everything else doesn't matter. And so we really have to address that stuff. And we have to look at all facets of it, and especially for our special populations, for our men suffering from medical issues and are severely mentally ill. I think we just need to continue to collaborate and work together and communicate. And I will say I'm motivated and pleased by the counties that I'm seeing across the state putting reentry councils together, bringing all of the people to the table to really try and address and have kind of that one-stop shop where people can go to try and help them navigate these systems. We have very complex systems, and how do you expect someone when they don't have transportation or funding to be able to navigate transportation to get to 6-7 different agencies to try and start being able to even look for a job? So I think we just really need to streamline it for people and help educate people on how to navigate the systems.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. Deanne, same question. What role should state, county, and local health and human service departments play in addressing the needs of returning residents?
So I'll go back to one of my earlier comments too, because I think it's important at this point as well, is that for too long, the justice system has been the response to everything. The police are the response to the mental health crisis or the domestic violence call. And so the sooner that we can say that the responses to these issues these issues are public health issues and should be addressed by a well-resourced public health system, that's like number one. But number two is that I think that we would be remiss, and I hate to say this, but we talk about, and I know that I'm being a bit cliche, we talk about the COVID pandemic. We know that racism is a pandemic. We know that we know that misogyny. We know that gender-based violence. We know that all these other issues are violence itself is an epidemic, right, or pandemic, right? And so, as we try to use the justice system response in mass incarceration to respond to it, we created another one, right? They all kind of fit together. And so I will say this, that those other epidemics or pandemics or structural issues still exist with or without the prisons in place. And something that we have to be very careful to do, and we found through our research and our work with directly impacted women, where we mapped the lives of hundreds of women across the state from the beginning of the trajectory all the way through to their reentry, I mean, well before prison. What we see is that all those other issues exist. Racism exists, misogyny exists, all those other issues exist within our public health system because it's all wrapped together right now. And so when you don't have trust there and doors are slammed in people's faces and they get substandard care and services, we just are naturally, not naturally that it's human nature, but because of the systems that we've created, we're pushing people to prison and into the justice system. So I think that our public health systems really need to take a close, hard look about dignity in the delivery of public services and inclusion and the culture in which they deliver those services. And the last thing I'll say is the brilliant Monica Cosby, who's our writer in residence, has told some pretty powerful stories about even when she got out of prison and she was sent to a halfway house, and how she said that she felt like she was released from one prison to another after 25 years behind bars, and how everything in that service that she was supposed to be grateful for after serving her time was almost mirrored the way that the prison rules work. And so, we have to, it was really profound. And we found women really saying dignity in the way they got treatment or other services, or even the way they were treated by the ER attendant is all part of this cycle. So I just want to make sure we don't ignore that.
Yaacov?
These departments, I feel these departments should be working in collaboration to ensure that every person returning back into society from prison or jail should be afforded the benefits and services of every other resident of this state. I'm currently focusing on some of these things within my role, such as pre-release, Medicaid enrollment, the state IDs, and we're going to make sure that people who are returning back to our communities are treated as, first and foremost, human beings and granted access to the services they need to thrive as productive citizens.
We are almost at the end of our time here, and I just want to do a quick round robin. If you could share with our viewers a final message that you want to leave them with, and perhaps a call to action around the topic and theme of this panel discussion. I'll start with Commissioner Johnson. Do you have any final words for our viewers?
Well, thank you. And thank you to the panelists for you all's incredible work and inspiration in this moment. Continue to organize and elevate and raise voices in this moment. Do not be silenced under no circumstances. We are in the midst of budget conversations in Chicago and Cook County. Demand that our budgets reflect the needs of the communities that have been impacted by these failed racist systems. You have an ally and a supporter in me on the county board. And again, as your voices continue to be raised, you can count on me to work to codify our liberation in a way that actually can bring real transformation, meaningful transformation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Jennifer?
Reentry impacts us all. This isn't a Chicago issue. This isn't a Springfield issue, an East St. Louis issue. It impacts everyone across our state. I absolutely believe wholeheartedly that Illinois Department of Corrections is moving in the right direction. Director Jeffries is committed to reentry not long after getting here, created the first reentry division with the Illinois Department of Corrections. This is an issue that's not going away. It's an issue that we need to improve. And I will say the call to action, I have two for our guest, is we need to continue to do reentry for everyone, including what we would consider our special populations, men and women that have sex offenses in their background, are severely mentally ill, two groups that we often leave out of the reentry conversation, especially around housing, and it's one we need to continue to address. And the second is our employers. I get a lot of calls around people that want to work with men and women coming home, but then don't want to work with people that have violence in their background. They are equally good employees, just as anyone else. So work with us, work with our men and women, provide opportunities. We need to continue to look at the barriers that we can take away, the laws over the years that have just made things more and more difficult for people. So I also want to say thank you to the panelists for your hard work and providing opportunities for our men and women that are coming back into our communities, all of our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Deanne?
I had some technical issues, so you might need to cut me out right now. But if this is working, I would say yes to what the commissioner said and Jennifer, but I would add no entry. I'd like to leave on no entry, and I would like to add on one of WJI's lines, which is see gender. See gender in the equation when we're delivering solutions, and don't overlook or eclipse the voices or experiences of women.
Alderman Burnett, any final comments?
Well, I would say this. Everyone that has been incarcerated, it could be a potential diamond in the rough. Look at me. I've been an alderman for over 26 years. I was incarcerated. I made a mistake, but, I got my life back on track, and so many other people are in the same position and can do the same thing. But they need support. I'm blessed that I've had support from folks like Jesse White, George Dunn, my parents, and my family, and we all need to just wrap our arms around people and help them to become the great folks that they are. It's inside of them, but they can't do it by themselves. When folks get out of jail, they don't have any transportation. They get a couple of dollars when they come home. And if we don't surround ourselves to help them, we set them up to fail. You give them nothing but you don't give them any alternatives, but to try to feed themselves and to get around. We need to help them. And if we help them, we help ourselves. We help society not to be harmed. We help society to grow and be a better society. And I know we can do it. There's a lot of people out here doing it. I appreciate the ones that are, but we need more folks to embrace and care about these people. And don't just wait until it's one of your family members who are in these positions. You need to look at everyone as part of your family, because we're one big family in this society.
Thank you, Alderman. Yaacov?
Yes. I always go back. So when I was released from prison almost 7 years now, it was through family support that provided a safe landing for me. But also it was an equitable opportunity that was offered and presented to me to work at the Ohio Justice and Policy Center, which is a legal organization that's in the forefront of criminal justice reform work in the state of Ohio. People who have experienced the justice system, and this is something that I'm always advocating about, is that we're human beings with value and worth. Most have been deprived of equity and opportunities before they even entered the prison system. We're people who have experienced dehumanization before going to prison and often inside of the prison facilities. Most people returning to society will need basic necessities to succeed in the next phase of their life after prison, such as supportive housing, medical care, state IDs, clothing, food assistance, financial assistance, transportation assistance, family and community support, mental and emotional support. And I think most of us know these things already. But one of the most essential needs for a person, returning from prison is to be treated as a human being who's deserving of equitable opportunities to thrive as a productive citizen within this society. And as a community and society, I feel it's our duty to ensure this need is supplied. It's a common sense approach to address public safety and recidivism. It's through equity and opportunity that I'm able to speak on this panel today on behalf of the office of this state's first African American lieutenant governor. And I feel that speaks volumes to the mission of this office and to the JEO initiative to ensure that communities that have often been ignored will know they have a seat at the table. People who have criminal records and formerly incarcerated, we're diligently working on your behalf. And once again, thank you for having me here today to be able to speak about some of these issues that's pressing and the issues that we're currently working on.
Well, it doesn't get much better than this, ladies and gentlemen and friends. We are at our time. I want to say thank you to all of our panelists for being here today. And please stay connected. Make sure you follow up on those action items and those calls to action that were shared with you. Have a great day.
Hi there, everyone. We had a little technical issue with our moderator for a moment. I'm Deanne Benos from the panel, obviously. So I'm going to kick us off with a Q&A session that has been received for this group, and I'll read it to our fellow panelists. The first question from the participants in the program is, what is the current status of the Returning Residents Office / initiative that Mayor Lightfoot promised while campaigning as a candidate for mayor? So that's our first question. Would any of our panelists like to volunteer to kick off a response to that?
So this is Alderman Walter. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for offering me the opportunity to be on this panel. Unfortunately, I was too busy with the other candidate that I didn't pay attention to what the mayor was campaigning things. So I don't remember what she promised that she was going to do as far as dealing with incarceration. So I don't remember any of those promises. But what I do know is that we're trying to do more in the city. It's a few voices. And we're trying to recognize more. Matter of fact, I was just we in budget hearings right now. And one of the things I was talking to the city clerk about yesterday at the budget hearing was that with her those IDs that she have, the true IDs, that they need to make it easier for ex-offenders to get them. Maybe we can go to the prisons and allow them to get them in prisons. Maybe they should be connected with the Secretary of State so it's easier for them to get their state ID and all of those things. So, there's a few voices, is in particular with the African Americans and the Latino caucus that say is pushing for different things to happen for ex-offenders. In our Department of Family and Supportive Services, no matter what anyone say during a campaign, we still need to hold their feet to the fire and encourage them to do more and make priorities to adjust funding toward ex-offenders.
Thanks so much, Alderman, for your response and just for being a leader for so long and such an important figure and change agent on these issues for such a long time. Would anyone else like to pipe in about the mayor's initiative? I will add one thing. I'll be moderator panelist while we work through this right now. I did have the privilege of meeting with the mayor, her wife, Amy Eshelman, First Lady M.K. Pritzker, Lieutenant Governor Stratton, and CNN hero Susan Burton, who is, for those that don't know, is a national leader, directly impacted woman from Los Angeles that founded one of the most successful reentry housing programs designed specifically for women in the country. And so while I have not been involved in the mayor's direct reentry planning process, I know that she was incredibly responsive and expressed interest in reentry housing for women and ways the city can promote that. Now, of course, that was before the pandemic and a lot of things are happening, but we found her to be responsive to that issue. Amadou, are you back with us?
I'm back. I don't know what happened. You know, this Zoom world, folks just kick you out. Probably the Russians. So where are we? Did we ask the question here?
Nope, you can take it away for this next one.
Okay, cool deal. So we've got an audience question. Great to see everybody again. Currently, if you take a look at the governmental institutions of Cook County, City of Chicago, and the state of Illinois, none have a robust reentry program. How can elected officials say they support reentry, but their own institutions don't have any significant reentry programs? That's interesting. I mean, I would kick that to the elected officials, who I'm sure have perhaps a different take based on the level of investment that their institutions have, their units of government have kicked in. But perhaps Alderman, we can go to you, and then Commissioner Johnson, we can kick it to you as well.
Sure. Excuse me, my dog, she want all the attention. Go lay down. I'm sorry about that. So the questions was, how can how can the elected officials, can I see the question again? I'm sorry. It was a long question.
Yeah. So Alderman, the question is essentially, I think the essence of this is really, how do we get county government and city government to create their own reentry programs? And how do we move city and county in those directions?
So I think what we need to do, right, as I said earlier, and I don't know if it was came up on the panel, but people need to feel, Black, white, Hispanic, that a returning citizen affects everyone. It affects everyone's family, and because people look at a returning citizen and just think that that won't affect me, but if they family members are affected, it affects you, because they family members vote too. And I think we need to get more family members that support returning citizens, that have the burden of a returning citizen not having a job, not having a place to stay, not having all those things, that we encourage these families to step up and speak to their elected officials, and let the elected officials know that, hey, Ms. Jones, who never been incarcerated, is concerned about this issue because her son or her grandson or her daughter need help. And we need to encourage more people. If you count the number of people who have been incarcerated who do vote, if you count their family members who do vote, I mean, they can change a whole election. And we need to make elected officials feel that. Elected officials need to recognize that these are your constituents, whether you recognize it or not, and it has an effect on all of your constituents, not just the ones who have been incarcerated. And we need to continue to encourage them to do that, and try to get elected officials to make it a priority. It needs to be a priority for housing. We have a hard time with affordable housing all the time. We were blessed to change CHA to allow for ex-offenders to be able to move into HUD properties. HUD had a policy that if you had a record, you couldn't move in their property, right? Which is some of the least expensive housing that you can get. And we had to push for a policy like that. We had to push for ban the box. There's still other things that we have to continue to push for in government to make society, a lot of people in society want to have their family who have returned and don't want to admit that they have family members who have had problems, whether it be ex-offender, returning citizen, or even drug problems. But we all have those problems. And we need to all step up to the plate and try to figure out what we can do and encourage government to do so. So when I do stand up and say something in the city council about it, people start to recognize, and they start to empathize. But more people need to say something.
Alderman, just real quick follow-up, and then I'll go to the commissioner. You all are in the midst of budget season. So this week, next week, upcoming weeks, you're going to be deliberating and talking about the city's budget. will you be able to ask questions of the mayor's staff and the administration about what they're doing to address reentry issues?
Definitely. One of the main ones, a lot of our money for reentry. So the city has a lot of our money for reentry go toward the Department of Family and Supportive Services, but also we made a policy. We had, it's been going on for a long time that we made a policy that you could hire ex-offenders in the city of Chicago. But quiet as this kept, quiet as this kept, a lot of white ex-offenders been getting hired in government for a long time, right? and it never was an issue. But we had to make a policy so that minority people can get hired officially in government in order to have a job. So we made those policies, but we will ask the Department of Family and Supportive Services, what more are they doing with the money? Right now, a lot of folks are putting emphasis on the crime prevention, right? But folks aren't thinking about the stabilization of people who have been incarcerated in order to prevent crime too. They don't look at supporting the ex-offender as crime prevention. And I think we need to change that narrative to make folks understand.
Awesome. Thank you, Alderman. Commissioner Johnson, and then we've got another question here about investing in Medicaid at IDOC and pre-enrollment that I'm going to give to Yaacov and to Jennifer. But our Commissioner.
Yeah, thanks, Amadou. And really, Alderman Burnett laid out, I think some very key components. One of the things that we do have to address is the fact that our system is bloated with Black and brown folks that are attached to the penal system, and that's intentional. And so one of the things that I think it's important, and why I believe at the county level we've been leading this charge, where we have obviously depopulated have begun to decriminalize, certain activity that has often been used to place our people in particular in bondage. So we really have to be thoughtful about everything from the school to prison pipeline that has exacerbated this penal system, where stop and frisk policies have been able to run amok that have really caused like the type of damage that we've experienced in our community. So that's one component of it. The second thing is, I think, is what we've attempted to do at the county level, because it is a priority for me. Alderman Burnett and I, we have similar constituents. Our districts, his ward overlaps with a portion of my district. And one of the first things that we did, because returning citizens overwhelmingly come to the west side of Chicago, and that's well documented. And of the neighborhoods that I represent, Austin, Garfield Park, West Humboldt, our people are here. I think this is what the Alderman was alluding to, that you can't separate reentry from the larger community, because they're here, right? Whether you agree with them or not. And there are family members that are living in our basements. We're supporting them to the best of our ability. So that's why I supported, and not only supported, but I was the chief sponsor of the Just Housing Amendment, which of course was working to remove the barriers, making it almost impossible for families who've come out of the penal system to access housing. And Alderman Burnett was there with us and supporting our efforts to do that. I think that's the second thing. I think the third thing too is, we have to be very honest about the fact that we're not doing enough. And I know very few elected officials will be honest about that, but look, I've been in office for a year and a half, and there are nights, to be honest with you, where I wake up in the middle of the night thinking, what else can we do? So I think, to the Alderman's point, keep pushing us, keep organizing. We are as good as the people around us. There are things that we can champion because they're in us, right? That I don't need anybody to tell me to advocate for Black people, to advocate for brown people. I don't need anybody to tell me to do that. What we do need, though, is to have the type of organizing effort to help us get the amount of votes that we need to get the appropriations that we need to support our communities. Because the truth of the matter is, if you can have $1 million blocks with individuals who've been formerly incarcerated, literally all around us, millions of dollars invested in our incarceration, it is not unreasonable for us to demand billions of dollars of investment in our communities to make them whole again. So continue to do the work that we've done, recognizing that we haven't done enough. And then I think third, we we got to continue to organize and make sure that we're pushing to make our politics and our institutions reflect our values.
Commissioner, same follow-up question, just a quick yes or no. You all are in budget season as well. Can you ask the administration what they're doing on reentry and just pose the question so we can start getting their attention drawn to these issues more?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, what we've already gotten so far is that there's a $25 million reduction at the very minimum, a $25 million reduction in the sheriff's budget away from incarceration and policing. And we have already secured at least $80 million more dollars in the areas of need. So that's everything from the Justice Advisory Council, workforce development, transportation. Is that enough? Absolutely not. Are we going to continue to fight for more? Absolutely, I am.
Awesome. Thank you. This next question is for Yaacov. I'm going to ask Jennifer and Deanne to chime in as well. This question is really about, I'm going to wordsmith it a bit. It's really about Medicaid. And I think we all agree that this really should happen before people return back into the community and should be happening beforehand. And Yaacov, I'm going to start with you because you work at the highest levels of government. And I imagine you've been in a room or two where you've heard some whispers about maybe what might happen on this issue. But just if you wouldn't mind speaking to what type of investment you believe may be necessary to begin enrolling people who are leaving IDOC prior to their release in Medicaid, assuming that 99.9% of people who are in IDOC qualify for it, probably 100%, because they essentially have had no income. What work can be done on that? And I would just say for Jennifer and Deanne, please feel free to speak to the question in this iteration, but also what should this look like? And Deanne, specifically for you, what ought this look like for women who are leaving home as well? And what does this mean having something like this in place? But Yaacov, we'll go to you first.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah. And yeah, to answer your question, I have heard some whispers on it. So yeah, this is an important issue. I prioritize this issue as a part of my agenda in this role that I'm in with JEO Initiative. And there are individuals within IDOC who are currently being enrolled in Medicaid prior to their release. I think Jennifer can speak more to that on what facilities is happening in. I know that Jennifer and I have had some conversations pertaining to this issue. I am doing what I can to assist her in this process being implemented throughout all IDOC facilities. We know how important it is for a person to have Medicaid enrollment prior to their release, because probably like after a person is released, it becomes another major barrier for that person. So it is important to have each individual enrolled in Medicaid prior to their release date, and we are currently working on that. And as I said, I know Jennifer can speak more to how that's being implemented right now in some facilities, as well as how it will be implemented throughout the state.
Thanks, Yaacov. Jennifer?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Yaacov. We, in a few of our facilities, are 100% everyone walking out the door is being enrolled in Medicaid. We have 3 dates slated in November where we will be doing a statewide training with all staff represented from all facilities. So they've identified 2 to 4 staff members from each facility that will be coming down to Springfield or up. And we're going to do over 3 days training. So all staff will be able to understand the process and make sure that we're enrolling as many people as possible prior to release. There's always going to be some people that we're going to miss, maybe with times their release date gets moved up. But the fact is we are starting the process much earlier, and we have each month been able to enroll more additional people than we were prior to their release. I know Illinois River is doing a fantastic job at it. Kewanee is doing a fantastic job. Joliet, Vandalia. We do have a few facilities that are absolutely doing a phenomenal job at this, but we need to be having all of our facilities doing a phenomenal job at this, and that's just not happening right now. I know we are doing a SNAP enrollment benefit pilot at Logan, as well as doing the enrollment, and Deanne might be able to touch on that a little bit. But it definitely needs to be improving, and we've had a lot of support at the Lieutenant Governor's office to try and help us navigate this and get this done at the DOC level.
Thank you, Jennifer. Deanne?
Yeah, I just want to say how meaningful it is to have a lieutenant governor like Juliana Stratton, the creation of the JEO, and folks like Jen appointed under this administration. It's certainly been a long road, and things always seem like they're simple, and they really should be. But to the earlier points we made with politics and people saying they want to do things for decades and not really putting their money there or the will. I'm glad to see movement after a very long time on those issues. On behalf of the Women's Justice Institute, I'll say that, we have our task force that's reached 500 women statewide for the last few years. Medicaid benefits, housing, among the leading issues women have expressed need for. A big recommendation is the universal Medicaid enrollment. We're happy to see in progress. I will add that thanks to investments from Cook County and the leadership at the Cook County level, we are now partnering with Cook County Health on a 500 woman reentry project with IDOC and IDOC Parole, where specialized Cook County Health care coordinators, with the model we're designing, are expediting enrollment for women coming into a treatment and mental health and wraparound program for women coming out over the next 5 years. And that extra boost at Cook County, because of some of the work here, is helping women expedite that process too. So I think I'm very hopeful to see this becoming more systemic for everyone, as Jen said, with the kind of work that she's leading at the department, hopefully soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Deanne. I want to go right back to you, actually. We've got a question here about addressing reentry holistically, and then I'd like to pose a question to the group about what it means for us to prepare for this latest spike in COVID cases inside facilities and what it looks like for people returning back home. A lot of this stuff is happening live and in the moment. But Deanne, you've had an opportunity to work in government and work in the not-for-profit sector, and so you kind of understand both sides of this issue of reentry. And so I'm just wondering, in your opinion and in your experience, what has prevented government from addressing reentry in a holistic fashion, in an integrated fashion? You alluded to the report with many recommendations that you will be releasing soon, and I imagine that they cross a broad spectrum of issues. But what is it that, in your experience, that you've seen that prevents county, state, local government from addressing reentry in a holistic way?
I think that I'm going to just echo, I think, what we saw throughout the panel and pick up on some comments made from my fellow panelists, which is that I think that the biggest mistake we make is looking at reentry or prison populations as different or separate from our communities. I know Alderman Burnett mentioned we're all a family, we're all in this together, and that's the way to proceed on many fronts, political, resource, and otherwise. But I think that what holds us back is looking at reentry as a boutique issue, or reentry as, oh, I just did this program and I funded this one and it's successful, so we fixed everything, right? And I think what we're hearing in this panel are a lot of systemic discussions. We've heard about the Just Housing Amendment. We heard about systemic enrollment in Medicaid. We've heard about Yaacov talk about the ID issue and looking at it systemically that the First Lady's working on with the department. And I think that's our failure, is that we don't look at this as a systemic issue, and we're not coming together to do that way. We're just trying to get away with, because the system is always in such crisis, because it's been built on such a flawed foundation, we're always going to be chasing like fixes or band-aids until we take a step back and everyone steps up together and promotes those solutions and doesn't get it through to the first success, but just create sustainable change in that way. That's one of many solutions, but I think that's what holds it back. And with women, I would be remiss. With women, we're always lumping men and women's needs together, and it's such a disservice to women to eclipse their needs and to toss them into these programs that were not designed for them, even if they are a smaller population. So we're always looking, not ill-intentioned, but for a quick, easy fix to these things. And it just requires some work and rolling up our sleeves together.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Deanne. I want to go to Yaacov and Alderman Burnett and also to Jennifer. We are now in the early stages of our third and most significant wave of COVID-19 cases. What can government and what should government be doing to prevent an even worse reentry housing shortage of host sites, transitional and shelter sites that people with records and service providers experienced during the earlier stages of the pandemic? So essentially, what are we doing what are we doing and what should we be doing to prepare ourselves and to mitigate all of the challenges associated with this third wave that we're literally in the midst of experiencing right now? Yaacov, I'll go to you first, and then Alderman Burnett will kick it to you, and then to Jennifer.
Great. I'm glad you came to me first. I actually wanted to respond to the other question as well. So I think my answer may touch upon both of them. I think in order to have like holistic reentry and as well as address some of the issues that's happening during COVID is that we have to, and I think Commissioner Brendan touched on it earlier, it's treating the people who are incarcerated and the people who are reentering society as human beings. I think that's how you get to the crux of it. Everyone that's in the Illinois Department of Corrections have committed some sort of offense that got them there or that landed them there. But in order for us to, I think we need to look at the reentry process as a crime prevention method, because once we start looking at individuals as human beings and addressing their needs as human beings, then each person that is released from IDOC facility, they're treated as human beings, their needs are met, and it prevents a person from having to struggle to meet those basic needs of housing or food or employment. And I think that's how we get to the crux of it, just addressing the needs of human beings and treating people as human beings. No policy is going to change that. No new recommendation is going to change that. That's a change in people's attitudes and behaviors, and a change in people's attitude and behavior, how they treat other people.
Awesome. Alderman Burnett. I think you're on mute, Alderman. Uh-oh. Alderman, are you with us? Okay, why don't we go to Jennifer and we'll work on Alderman Burnett's technical issues. Jennifer, would you mind answering that question?
Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Okay, there you go. Yes, we can. Go right on there.
So that's a very challenging question because, I think about, because I do a ministry with my church and we go to the jails. Now we can't go. We haven't been in a while. And I know guys that are sheriffs. A lot of guys in jail are probably safer than guys on the street, but I think a lot of them probably get the virus from folks who come in and out of jail. Some of the people who are working and going in. I'm sorry about that. Going in and out of jail. But I think the challenge with housing for folks with that's been incarcerated is that some of our policies that are set up as far as zoning goes, like with transitional houses and everything, you got to get approval from the community before you can allow for a transitional house to open up. And I had to fight with people all the time because they don't recognize that their family member may need to move in there one day, right? And it's an uphill battle. We need to change policies to make it where, you don't have to fight all the time to have places for people who have been incarcerated. But also when we need to make sure that when new people come in to the institutions that they get quarantined for a while, then they come into the institution, but we still got to make sure we continue to check the people that's in the institution that frequent the institution because they work there. This virus is really hard to to stop the wave of it, but we have to do everything we can and put extra money in there and making sure, I think a lot of folks that's incarcerated know how to govern themselves if we gave them all of the tools, right? If we give them all of the tools and we educate them, I think a lot of them would probably govern each other more than we can govern them ourselves in some instances.
Awesome. Thank you, Alderman. Jennifer, I'm going to go to you on this question, and then Commissioner Johnson, the final question will be for you. But Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind answering the same question that Yaacov and Alderman Burnett have answered.
Yeah, so Department of Corrections it has been a struggle. I think as everyone's struggling with COVID, we have worked really hard to try and reduce our population in a safe manner for all, and how we're screening and early releasing through earned discretionary sentence credit or electronic detention. The constant struggle, I will say, our Chief of Programs, Alyssa Williams, and I have talked about quite a bit, is how are we meeting the needs of people getting ready to go home when we've basically had to reduce our programming and our reentry services due to lack of movement within our DOC facilities. We're trying to socially distance, which is very difficult. We're trying to keep people separated and lack of exposure for our staff coming in and out, which is how COVID would be coming into our facilities. Since we don't have visits. And I know the men and women in our custody are desperate to see their families, as we all would be as well since March with no visits happening. So we're balancing safety, but then also at what cost as well, with the not being able to prepare people through reentry services and programming. So we've really gone to a paper-based approach, and there's a lot that we're getting left behind. People are not fully prepared walking out the door because of the safety measures we've had to take. So it's been a constant balance. It's been a very difficult one.
Thank you, Jennifer. Commissioner Johnson, we're going to save this last question for you, and then we'll wrap things up. But it's been a pleasure doing this panel. Commissioner, as you know, former public school teacher yourself, government is the largest employer in the Chicago area. How can government become the largest employer of people who are returning residents? So that is the final question for you.
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. And, one of the things that I'm always clear about is the role that government has played in stabilizing Black communities, brown communities, but more specifically, I think to what our sister indicated earlier, what the role government has played in securing the economic base of our communities, which is securing the economics of Black women and brown women in particular, where they are overly represented in the public sector. And so what I believe has to happen is essential, and I'll be very blunt about it. I think that the budgets that promote austerity, closures, these so-called efficiencies, I actually find those budgets to be quite racist and sexist. And I know there are individuals that will argue differently. And maybe to someone's point earlier, that may not be the intent of some of the folks who have moved those type of agendas. But what we've seen is that while schools are being closed, mental health care facilities are being closed, the previous governor, I know we don't like to mention his name, but he was very clear about going after public sector. And he was intentional about that, so much so that he filed a lawsuit that made its way all the way through the Supreme Court to undermine collective bargaining for individuals that are overwhelmingly represented and protected, Black folks and brown folks and women in particular. And so what we have to do is we have to pass, the first thing, we have to pass a fair tax structure in Illinois, where the billionaires and the millionaires who make more should put a little bit more skin in the game, using those $3 billion to expand public services. That's everything from transportation, public housing, which I know is dear to Alderman Burnett, public education, a public works program. My uncle retired as a streets and sanitation, had a good paying job and a pension that he left for his children to inherit. It's a good living. And there are good paying jobs that we can be employing to keep our communities clean, to reimagine what public safety means in our communities by having restorative justice practices and individuals that can respond to the trauma that our people have experienced for very for a very long time, to making sure that there are nurses and social workers in our schools. The last thing that I'll say is one of the hospitals on the west side of Chicago, which is a safety net hospital, it's called the Loretto Hospital. 70% of the individuals that receive care at the Loretto Hospital receive care through the Affordable Care Act. 30% of them are on Cook County care. Those are government-initiated programs. But here's the kicker. 40% of the workers at the Loretto Hospital, they live in Austin. When you expand the public space, you create an economic base for families that can stabilize communities. I think this should be the greatest effort that we put forth. When unemployment reached 30% for white men in this country, our country called it a national crisis. They didn't say pick yourselves up by your bootstraps. They didn't say entitlement programs. They didn't say anything like that. They literally gave white men shovels before there were things to dig. And the community that Alderman Burnett and I represent, unemployment, particularly within the Black young boys and Black young men, 16 to 24, that number is just through the roof. And so we have to create those opportunities, and government has the ability to create that incentive and that initiative. And that is one of my biggest goals as an elected official, is to see government respond to Black and brown folks and women the way they respond to white men.
And that is the final word. Well, thank you, Commissioner. We very much appreciate all of our panelists for joining us today. If you have any questions, all of your questions that have been submitted through the chat or through the question and answer feature in Zoom, they will be answered and emailed. But you can also email your question to CARRE, CARRE, at saferfoundation.org, and we'll be sure to make sure that those questions get answered as well. But again, a special thank you to all of our panelists, to all of the individuals who were involved in making sure that this production took place, and everyone enjoy the rest of the conference. Take care.
Thank you.